In the underworld of modern China, where wealth and desperation collide, there are markets the public will never see, markets where human life becomes a commodity and the most intimate part of a person, their organs, are sold to the highest bidder. At the center of one of the most shocking criminal networks in recent history was a man whose name became synonymous with greed, cruelty, and murder. He wasn't a typical gangster or drug lord. He was a businessman of death, a black market body dealer who supplied organs while covering up a trail of multiple murders. This is the horrifying story of a network where the living and dead were treated as inventory, and profit was more valuable than life itself. The emergence of a predator. The man at the center of the scandal was Chen Guo, a former medical technician from Guangzhou. Chen had spent years working in hospitals, learning the intricacies of surgery, organ extraction, and transplant procedures. But while his colleagues were committed to saving lives, Chen's ambitions twisted toward personal gain. By the early 2010s, he had left the hospital under mysterious circumstances, and rumors suggested he had falsified records and diverted organs for profit. Chen's network began quietly. He initially facilitated illegal organ transplants for wealthy clients who could afford the exorbitant costs, sourcing organs from vulnerable populations, homeless individuals, undocumented migrants, and people who had disappeared without explanation. Using his medical knowledge, he minimized the risk of infection or detection, creating a reputation for efficiency and discretion. It wasn't long before Chen expanded beyond opportunistic extractions. He developed a sophisticated black market system that blended legitimate medical procedures with criminal operations, effectively creating a hidden supply chain of human bodies and organs. The supply chain of death. Chen's operation relied on secrecy, bribery, and manipulation. Hospitals, morgues, and funeral homes were either coerced or paid to collaborate. Bodies that should have been buried were instead rerouted to these clandestine facilities, where organs were harvested and sold to private clients, both domestic and international. Recruiting workers for his network was chillingly methodical. Chen often targeted young men and women with criminal records or financial desperation, offering them well-paid medical assistant positions that promised a respectable life. Once employed, they were indoctrinated into his system of secrecy. Leaks or defiance were punished severely, often with threats of imprisonment or death. Chen's ability to navigate bureaucracy and bribe officials allowed him to operate for years without detection. Mortality records were falsified, deaths were staged as natural or accidental, and entire cases of missing persons were quietly covered up. By the time authorities started noticing irregularities, Chen's empire had already claimed hundreds of lives, murdered for profit. Unlike other criminals who kill for revenge, power, or intimidation, Chen's murders were cold, calculated, and purely transactional. When a wealthy client requested a specific organ, a kidney, liver, or heart, Chen would arrange for a victim to disappear and harvest the organ surgically, ensuring the body left no trace of foul play. One particularly harrowing case involved a young migrant worker named Li Wei. Li had no family, no identification, and was entirely dependent on temporary employment. Chen's team lured him under the guise of a construction job. Once isolated in a rented apartment, Li was sedated, his organs removed, and his body burned to eliminate evidence. The kidney was sold to a private client overseas, fetching a price unimaginable to Li's impoverished family. Victims were not always strangers. Chen's network sometimes targeted individuals with minor disputes, debts, or personal conflicts, rationalizing their deaths as necessary sacrifices to maintain business operations. Each murder was treated as a logistical problem to be solved, with meticulous planning ensuring no trace led back to Chen or his associates. The clandestine facilities. Chen's operations relied on carefully concealed facilities. In suburban warehouses and converted medical offices, refrigeration units were installed to preserve harvested organs until buyers could be located. Surgical rooms were equipped with sterilized instruments, anesthesia, and ventilation systems to simulate legitimate procedures. Workers were trained to remove organs quickly and efficiently, often under the supervision of Chen himself. He monitored operations closely, ensuring that mistakes were minimized and employees remained compliant. The level of sophistication made these facilities nearly indistinguishable from legitimate medical operations, which allowed Chen to continue undetected for years. The scale of the operation was staggering. Investigators later discovered that dozens of victims' bodies had been processed in a single week. The efficiency was such that Chen was able to supply high-demand organs across multiple provinces in China, and even export organs through informal international channels. Bribery, corruption, and cover-ups. Chen's success was not just based on medical knowledge, it was rooted in a complex web of corruption. Local officials, police officers, and hospital administrators were often bribed to look the other way. Payments were made in cash, offshore accounts, and even expensive gifts, including vehicles and luxury goods. When investigations began to approach Chen's network, insiders were silenced through threats or financial incentives. In some cases, law enforcement officers assigned to monitor suspicious deaths were removed, reassigned, or bribed directly. Chen's ability to manipulate both the legal and bureaucratic systems allowed him to operate with near impunity, creating a sense of untouchability that emboldened him to expand his activities further. Corruption also enabled the falsification of death certificates, morgue logs, and hospital records. Families of victims were often misled to believe their loved ones had died of illness or accidents, effectively hiding the murders behind bureaucratic documentation. The victims' stories behind every organ Chen sold. There was a life brutally ended. Survivors, families of the missing, and former employees described the trauma inflicted by his operation. Families often reported relatives missing for weeks or months before realizing the truth. Many had no closure, bodies were never returned, and explanations from authorities were vague and dismissive. Some survivors described narrowly escaping death after being lured to Chen's facilities, witnessing friends or co-workers disappear, and living under constant fear of retaliation. One former employee recounted the horror of seeing a victim sedated, prepped for organ removal, and then quietly wheeled away while the staff prepared the next job. The normalization of murder among Chen's associates showed the extreme psychological control he exerted over those around him. The investigation begins. Authorities began suspecting Chen's network after noticing unusual patterns in missing person reports and organ transplant records. Medical professionals became alarmed at the rapid availability of organs, which often bypassed official wait lists. Investigators were drawn to inconsistencies in death certificates, sudden surges in cremation rates, and financial records indicating large transfers of money linked to Chen and his associates. The investigation was difficult. Chen's layers of secrecy, combined with bribery and fear, slowed progress. Witnesses were often unwilling to cooperate, fearing reprisals. Surveillance and undercover operations became essential to collect direct evidence of his crimes. During this period, several key insiders came forward, providing critical details about the facilities, procedures, and logistics of Chen's operations. Their testimony revealed not only the scale of his murders, but also his meticulous planning, which included escape routes, falsified documentation, and contingency plans to evade law enforcement. The arrest and evidence chain was finally apprehended in 2022 during a coordinated raid involving multiple provinces and the Ministry of Public Security. Authorities seized several facilities, dozens of harvested organs in refrigeration units, detailed ledgers documenting hundreds of transactions, and files containing photographs, medical records, and communications detailing murder plans. Evidence revealed the extent of Chen's operation. He had murdered dozens, possibly hundreds, of individuals to supply organs over nearly a decade. The network had involved hundreds of workers, some complicit under duress, others fully aware of the crimes. Investigators described the operation as industrialized murder, highlighting the chilling efficiency with which Chen treated human life as a commodity. Each step from recruitment to killing, organ extraction, and sale was carefully calculated to maximize profit while minimizing risk of detection. Chen's trial became one of the most shocking criminal cases in modern Chinese history. Prosecutors presented evidence of multiple murders, illegal organ sales, and systemic corruption involving government and medical officials. Families of victims testified, describing the profound impact of losing loved ones under mysterious circumstances. The trial revealed gruesome details: the methodical extraction of organs, the falsification of records, and the deliberate concealment of deaths. The court also examined the psychological manipulation of staff, showing how Chen maintained control over a network of willing and coerced accomplices. Chen remained largely unrepentant. He argued that all life is negotiable and that his actions were merely part of a business to meet demand for organs. His detachment shocked the court and public alike. In 2023, Chen was sentenced to death, with several of his accomplices receiving life imprisonment. Authorities also launched investigations into the officials and institutions that had enabled his crimes. The case of Chen Guo is more than a story of crime. It is a story of human depravity and the commodification of life. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths: that some will see life not as sacred, but as inventory, that systems meant to protect us can be corrupted, and that the darkest horrors can exist in plain sight, masked by legitimacy, wealth, and expertise. The black market body dealer is gone, but the echoes of his crimes linger, a chilling reminder that greed can turn life into a transaction, and that justice, though delayed, must illuminate even the darkest corners of human ambition.